Imagine just for a second, waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that every mistake you have ever made has been completely erased. I mean, every single regret, every failure, every terrible decision, even that deeply embarrassing moment at 3 a.m. that still pops into your head out of nowhere and just completely haunts you. Boom, completely gone. The slate is entirely clean. Well, in today's Explainer, we're diving into a paradigm-shifting concept that completely redefines how we view our own potential, our past, and ultimately our future.
Seriously, really ask yourself, what if every mistake was actually erased? How would you feel in that exact moment? Would you feel this sudden, massive weight just lifted right off your chest? Would you feel relieved, free, maybe genuinely hopeful about the day ahead? Now, here is the shocking truth that we're going to unpack today. The greatest spiritual masters in human history would tell you that those mistakes never truly defined you in the first place. You are not your worst day, and your past absolutely does not have the final vote on your future. Yet despite that incredible truth, millions of people spend their entire lives locked up in a mental prison built by a story about who they used to be. You know the feeling. They look in the mirror and just repeat these deeply limiting beliefs. I'm too broken. I've done way too much damage. I've wasted too many years. It's too late. I can't change now. They let the echoes of yesterday completely drown out the possibilities of tomorrow. Well, today we are going to completely destroy that dangerous lie.
Okay, Section 1. The man who proved it. To absolutely shatter any preconceived notions you might have about redemption, we need to travel back nearly 1,000 years to Tibet and look at the life of a man named Milarepa. Now, he wasn't born a saint, he definitely wasn't born enlightened. In fact, he began as something closer to what we today might call a complete disaster. As a kid, Milarepa's family lost literally everything and suffered terrible abuse from their own relatives. And driven by this unbearable, all-consuming pain, he didn't just get mad. He actually learned black magic to exact deadly revenge. According to the traditional histories, his actions resulted in multiple deaths. So this wasn't a guy who simply made a few everyday slip-ups, right? He was drowning in immense guilt and profound darkness. And yet, this exact same man underwent an incredibly extreme, grueling transformation to become one of Tibet's most revered and celebrated spiritual masters. So, think about it. If a transformation of that magnitude was possible for him, what excuse do the rest of us really have?
Overwhelmed by the crushing emptiness of his revenge, Milarepa sought out a great teacher named Marpa. But Marpa didn't just give him a hug, say some comforting words, and pat him on the back. No, he forced Milarepa to build massive stone towers with his bare hands, tear them all down, and then build them all over again. It's literally like paying for a gym membership where your trainer just makes you carry heavy bricks uphill for 6 straight years. But there is a really profound brilliance to this method. The core lesson here is that transformation requires purification, not punishment. Think of your own regrets like heavy rocks in a backpack. Most people just keep adding rocks to the bag, walking around totally exhausted, but they never actually take the time to empty it. Milarepa's grueling physical tasks were a physical manifestation of unloading that heavy backpack. He was quite literally working the darkness right out of his system.
Moving right along, Section 2, the 3 mental prisons.
Let's move into the underlying psychology here and see how this ancient wisdom maps perfectly onto our modern understanding of feeling stuck. Because the truth is, most people aren't actually suffering because of what happened to them. They're suffering because they keep replaying what happened to them on this continuous, never-ending loop. We trap ourselves in 3 specific mental prisons. The first is identity. Ancient wisdom tells us that suffering kicks off the moment we cling to fixed identities. I mean, notice the massive difference between saying, I struggle with procrastination versus I am lazy. Saying I am broken traps you in a fixed identity that your ego then feels completely obligated to defend. Then we trap ourselves with guilt, which we'll dive into in a second. And the third prison is the fear of starting over. This is that paralyzing fear of looking foolish or losing your status. But hey, remember, every master was once a beginner, and every enlightened being was once totally lost.
But let's look at that second prison, because it's arguably the most dangerous, and that's guilt. Now, guilt can actually be a highly useful compass, right? It tells us when we veered off course and violated our own core values. That's healthy guilt. It simply says, I made a mistake. But what most people do is they turn guilt into a permanent residence. They literally unpack their bags, paint the walls, invite their friends over, and live there for decades. That is toxic guilt. It shifts the entire narrative from, I made a mistake, to, I am the mistake. Those are two completely different things, and confusing them is exactly what keeps you chained to your past, totally unable to move forward.
And science totally backs up this ancient wisdom through a concept you've probably heard of: neuroplasticity. Your brain doesn't just act like a computer hard drive that retrieves perfectly fixed, unchangeable files. It actually physically reconstructs memories every single time you access them. So every time you sit there and replay a painful memory or wallow in that toxic guilt we just talked about, you are physically strengthening the neural pathway associated with failure. The more you tell yourself you're a failure, the easier it becomes for your physical brain to believe it as a cold, hard biological fact. You are literally rewiring your brain's physical structure every single day, whether you mean to or not.
Which brings us to Section 3, your reinvention framework.
Okay, so we know the science and we know the history. But how do we actually do what Milarepa did without having to haul literal stones up a mountain for 6 years? Let's break down a really concrete 5-step actionable framework for your own reinvention. Step 1. Stop defining yourself by your past. Transform that pain into wisdom by finding the lesson rather than just repeating the punishment over and over. Step 2. Practice radical responsibility. Now, to be clear, this is not self-blame. Self-blame creates helplessness. This is true responsibility, which creates immense power. Step 3. Build daily evidence. Look, confidence doesn't magically appear just because you look in the mirror and say some positive affirmations. It requires daily proof. You need to take just one courageous action today. Step 4. Forgive yourself repeatedly. This is huge. Self-forgiveness isn't some magical one-and-done event. It's a messy, non-linear, everyday practice. And finally, Step 5. Commit to a purpose larger than yourself. Purpose is the alchemy that transforms meaningless pain into vital fuel for your training.
All right, Section 4. The paradox of awakening.
As you start applying these 5 steps to your own life, you're inevitably going to bump into what we call the paradox of awakening. This is a super counterintuitive realization that Milarepa discovered, and it's exactly where almost everyone stumbles. The paradox is this: desperately fighting and rejecting yourself is the exact thing preventing your transformation. There's a beautiful little realization that captures this perfectly. It goes, a tree doesn't scream at itself to grow faster. It simply grows. So many of us are just at constant war with ourselves, right? We criticize, we reject, we try to force ourselves into being worthy. But true, lasting growth stems from self-acceptance and a kind of gentle awareness. You don't grow through constant self-attack. You grow through conscious evolution. You simply take it one day, one moment at a time, and just allow the growth to happen naturally.
And this brings us right to the famous two wolves analogy. You've probably heard this one. Imagine two wolves fiercely fighting inside of you. One wolf is fear, resentment, toxic guilt, and victimhood. The other wolf is courage, wisdom, forgiveness, and compassion. So, which one wins? The one you feed. Milarepa didn't erase his past. He simply stopped feeding his need for revenge and started feeding his awareness. He starved the dark wolf and nourished the light one. Your daily, present actions matter infinitely more than your historical past. Your past is merely a chapter, guys. It is absolutely not the entire book.
Which brings us to a deeply provocative question I want to leave you with in this explainer today. If a man who committed the darkest of acts could empty his heavy backpack and become an absolute beacon of light and wisdom, then you are nothing less than infinite possibility. You are living, breathing possibility. So the real question to ask yourself right now isn't, can I change? The real question is, am I finally ready to stop believing that I can't? Your next chapter doesn't start tomorrow, it begins right now. Thanks for exploring this with me today. I challenge you to step out of that mental prison and step into your infinite possibility.